Civil rights campaigner Ian Cameron is calling for a ban on bail for perpetrators of violence against children. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you, Chris. It's good to be with you.
Tell us why you believe that is absolutely necessary now.
So I think there are a few things to consider, but I think we've come to a point, I think the crux of the matter is we've come to a point in South Africa where we all know that there's a massive crime issue. What concerns me is the major increase in severe violence against children and even teenagers, and the fact that many of the perpetrators that commit the very violent offences were already out on bail for other violent offences that they committed. Now, the interesting part is that we actually have a few cases at the moment ranging from very little children, I'm talking from 2 years old, that were murdered, up until 16, 17, even 18 years old. And the majority of them were eventually either killed or hurt far worse by the same perpetrator that was previously charged for hurting them, but he was out on bail.
Just in the space of 1 week, you attended 4 or 5 cases.
Yeah, so I just actually got back. It's not a child case. I just got back from court from the case of Sipokazi Boy. Now, the guy that killed her, ironically enough, was also out on bail after he beat her into hospital. I think we've spoken about the case before, but just as a recap, in September 2021, he beat her into hospital. She spent 2 weeks in hospital. She was severely injured. Most of her face was fractured. He then got bail after being charged with assault with the intent to commit grievous bodily harm, so assault GBH. And I think that the very worrying part is not only did the state not oppose bail, but he then kidnapped her and he kicked her to death and set her alight in a dustbin after cutting her up. So it's a incredibly graphic story. Now, here's the other example. I just got back from that, but as we speak in Gauteng, my colleague is in court for the case of Chevonne Rusch. Now, little Chevonne was 2 years old when she was brutally murdered. Her mom was involved. Social Services, Department of Social Development, was well aware of the circumstances that this little girl was living in. They had removed her brothers, I think it was her brothers and sister, but they had removed other siblings because of bad care, but they left Chevonne there. It was reported several times. And when they found little Chevonne's body, I'm told that it had over 140 bruise marks on her body with burn marks around her mouth. Now, what they burned her with, I don't know, but that's where another colleague is. And so the list goes on. And again, it's this whole thing, and I spoke to you before about the idea of an integrated strategy where social development kind of doing their own thing, not being held accountable. The police are doing one thing and the MPA is doing another, and all of them are kind of working against each other instead of together.
Please take us through some of those cases that Action Society attended last week.
Yeah, so sure. It was a rough week. Interesting, in the last 24 hours after last week, we've got 5 violent cases, of which 2 out of the 5 involve children. Just from last week, I think what bothered me was the fact that it's not something that you can just point to the police. So there's a shortage of detectives, forensic backlogs, and then the delay in courtroom processes, constant postponements. But the one case is the case of Bokgabo Poo. Now, you would have likely noticed it in the media. Most people have heard the name Bokgabo. Bokgabo was a little girl close to Actonville, close to Wattville in Benoni, and she was brutally murdered there, also mutilated, cut up. Some of her body parts, according to my knowledge, were never found. And the guy that did it was, the charges were dropped last week. The state had no way of bringing evidence to court that could accurately link him to the murder of Bokgabo. He was luckily found guilty of the rape of a 9-year-old child, luckily in the sense that at least something is keeping him behind bars, and he got quite a hefty life sentence. But that being said, we still don't know who really killed Bokgabo. This guy definitely had something to do with it because there was CCTV footage of him walking with Bokgabo. But you can just imagine going through all this trauma, almost a year, what those parents feel. And it's difficult to say that the police messed it up because there's only, there certainly were some inadequacies, but, these things happen. I think that the challenge that we see is that it is case upon case upon case where it keeps on being repeated. Then the other case that we attended last week was the case of Lihle Zenzile. This was in Bokgabo, close to Paul. So Lihle was 10 years old when she was murdered. She was found stuffed into a trunk in her parents' bedroom on the 6th of January this year. And the 80-year-old suspect, I think he's actually a family member, was arrested when he turned himself in. Again, one must ask, what were the possible previous problems or incidents that this individual was involved in? Because it's easy for everyone, including us, to go and protest at court, but what could we have done to prevent it? And that's a whole nother discussion. I think the last two that really stand out are, one is we call it the pole stalk and stabber. She's a young guy that is 5 years older than his ex-girlfriend. She keeps on telling him to leave her alone. And about 3 weeks ago, we were called by a local farm watch saying that this guy had again attacked this young girl. He was out on bail after he previously stabbed her in one of her lungs. She ended up in hospital. She had 2 protection orders against him with a warrant for arrest should he contravene the protection order. And then he attacked her again. You know what the crazy thing is, Chris, is that when we went to court the first time with his first appearance, we got there and the court said that they weren't aware of any previous offenses. This after I specifically not only gave the cops on the scene the case number, I gave them the protection orders, the warrant for arrest, everything, and they never added it to the docket. And then the last one, which is actually a very positive case, it seems that it's going to have a positive outcome, is the one that we call the photographer rapist of Stellenbosch. So there's a prominent Group 1 car sales company, I won't say the manufacturer now, that appointed this guy after they knew that the police were looking for him as a person of interest in this investigation. And what he would do, he would get young girls to go for photo shoots as though he's a professional photographer. He'd take them up places like Baines Kloof, etc. in the Western Cape, and then he'd do the photo shoot, but then he would rape them. And we've actually had several young ladies now come forward and say, but we've also been, raped by this guy, or he sexually assaulted us, etc. The crazy thing about this is when we followed it up, the cops said, no, we don't currently have a van. We can't go do the arrest when we had found the suspect. So we had to literally fight just to have him arrested. Now, luckily, he stayed behind bars. We've had bail denied, etc. But I think these cases actually summarize the crisis that we find ourselves in, and that civil society plays such a crucial role in pressuring the state to actually do their jobs.
What would it take to get the justice system to introduce a directive that bail should be refused for attackers of children?
I must be honest, I don't see it happening very easily. I think we would really have to follow several routes. One would be a parliamentary one where we need to pressure them in that way. I don't think it will be difficult to get the support. The challenge that we have is that the implementation of these things is often done wrongly, and because of the high levels of corruption, you might have a chance that someone that's actually innocent is denied bail and they don't have a chance for fair treatment, which makes it incredibly difficult. It's like people calling for the death sentence. Now, whether you agree with it or not, you want a government that can't even fill a pothole to decide who they're going to kill. How do we know that they're killing the right person? It's not quite that simple. That being said, that is the direction we need to move in. Children in South Africa at a higher and higher rate are not safe. And we have to find a way to keep these perpetrators behind. Well, this morning in court, the guy walks in. I always sit right in front, right by the bench where the perpetrator stands or sits, or the accused. And there's no remorse, walks in, smile, calm. I honestly think we just have evil people. We have got many evil people, and we need to treat them as such. This idea that some people all people have some good in them, I honestly believe we've got monsters that literally hunt children, and we need to treat them in the same way.
I was just going to ask you, you listen to testimony in court in these cases. What explanations, if any, do the suspects and perpetrators give for raping and mutilating children?
Most of the times you don't even get a straight answer. Look, there's often aggravation when it's not a minor. And when I say, let's say, when it's a toddler, obviously there could be many other things involved, like murders, that type of thing. That's a whole different ballgame, and it's a much deeper other discussion. But that plays a role. But when you look at people that are usually older that these things happen to, say teenagers that are in a relationship with someone that's, a bit older than them, that kind of thing, very often it's a matter of rage. They don't want him back. They don't, want to sleep with him. There's a list of excuses that you often hear, and then that person gets enraged. I also think that it ends up going wrong because there are cases already against the suspect, and then he somehow decides that by killing the victim or by really hurting them, they won't speak up again, or that the case wouldn't be followed up. It just bothers me, Chris, that criminals it's almost as though their rights are taken into consideration far more than innocent people. And it's important to have a fair justice system, but at the moment, it often feels like the justice system favors the criminal over innocent people. The criminal gets 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 second chances, but the victim never gets a second chance.
That was Ian Cameron speaking to Biz News about the evil monsters that hunt South African children. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Chris.